Yeah.
This meeting is being recorded.
Sorry. Now, recording is in progress. I'm going to pass it on to Karen to give us a bit of an outline of what we are going to discuss today and a bit of a framework for you to think about this campaign in the context of your teaching and your practice, and to think outside the square on how this campaign might be of value for your teaching and for your students, and how you might be able to join those dots and draw those lines between the campaign, different assets, and your physical education teaching and the physical education curriculum. So I'll pass it on to Karen.
Thank you. So we've had a fair bit of chat about the campaign, and as Luciana indicated there, that crossover between the two and how we can both benefit. So it's really pertinent here to be thinking about our overarching whakataki. And when you think about what we want for our rangatahi and our wahine rangatahi, we do want them to have those positive feelings in their heart, and of course that self will be enhanced with that. So when we think about whakatauki, as we go through the webinar, really thinking about how well your program, your pedagogy and your teaching assists our kainga to feel the way that we want them to feel. So when we reflect on what we're doing, are we taking that chance to see whether we could be doing things a little bit better for them? So we've discussed that idea of ihiwihi and wana, and this is a concept that I think is really important to look into, that idea of ihi, and that is that intangible emotion that, and we're talking about it in a PE context, that connection between the tinana and the wairua. So the tangible, the intangible, and that potential, and then the realization of that potential. So in PE, it might be that ability to be inspiring, be charismatic, lead in a way that inspires others, and that will lead on to the wihi, and that will then lead on to the wana. So I think it's really important to acknowledge this kaupapa that's present in Aotearoa Sport New Zealand, and is becoming inherent in our PE programs if it's not already there. It is something that people will be developing and understanding. And thinking about that for our rangatahi wahine as well will be really important. So when you look at what the insights that are in the campaign that Luciana is talking about today, those 10 points on the right fit really nicely against what we've got in our big ideas that are present in the RAS. That fact that movement is integral to whole order, which is that overarching big idea. And of course, point number one there is that focus on well-being. So whole order right in the middle. And if they go back to our whakatauki, that sits in there really nicely. And we know that every move counts. If we can get them moving, if we can get people wanting to move, that is what we're trying to achieve there. So participation in physical activity that is right for them, and the idea for the feels is something we talked about with ihi as well. If it's feeling good, you're more likely to want to keep doing it. And I think this fits really nicely in the campaign, but it's also huge in terms of the big ideas and what we want our ākonga to be looking at. So with regards to underlying concepts, front end of our curriculum, always what we should be going back to and thinking about. So can this framework be used for questioning our students? And I think it sits really nicely in there to be thinking, why is whole order important? How might individuals, groups, society benefit? Where do attitudes and values come from? And then what are the parallels between our sport and our PE programs? So when we think about what we're going to hear today, the socio-ecological perspective sits right here in front of what's trying to be happening, and of course health promotion. I think that leads into you now, Luciana.
Thank you, Karen. And I won't bore you too much with too much theory or too much strategic context. But so you have an idea how this campaign started. Sport New Zealand's strategy 2020-2024 has a strong focus on tamariki and rangatahi, especially those that are disengaging or missing out. So we know through data that girls and particularly teenage young women are dropping off physical activity at a higher rate than their peers, their male peers. And also we have a women and girls in sport and active recreation government strategy that has a strong focus on participation, because again, through lots of data, we know girls and young women tend to be underrepresented in physical activity in general. So that was calling for action. And one of the ideas was to do a national campaign that really amplify and created the national momentum to call for action for particularly providers of physical activity to start thinking differently. So you do work with female rangatahi, so probably all those insights are not new to you. This is your day to day. So you probably are seeing that females are less active than males. Not only the number of hours that they are spending per week, but also the number of activities they are doing, it drops off at those teenage years. One of the really interesting insights that we had through quantitative data is that young women are one of the 8 groups in demographics that identify the most barriers to be active. They are one of the demographics that their physical activity levels drop the most, but at the same time, they are one of the demographics that have the highest understanding of the value that physical activity brings to their lives and their well-being. And also 9 out of 10 young women want to be more active. So on one side, they are craving for more physical activity, but then what they are also telling us is that what's being offered to them is not meeting their needs, and they are identifying lots of extrinsic barriers to be active. And something really interesting, and the other day I was sharing this with a group of rugby unions from across the country. When you look at the motivations for girls, young women, and young adult females, the motivations don't change throughout the lifespan. Fun, fitness, and friends are the top 3 motivations. They change the order, but it's still really important for girls and young women to get that fun factor, to strengthen friendships, and to feel that they are improving their fitness through physical activity. Another really interesting, and I don't know if you have had a chance to have a look yet at the Voice of Rangatahi 2021. So that's available on Sport New Zealand website. It was released this week. So the Voice of Rangatahi is a survey that all schools can complete and do, and it really explores the physical activity experiences that Rangatahi are having in the school setting. So that looks at sport, active recreation, and also physical education. And we know female physical activity experiences in the schools are less positive than males across those 3 settings. So this really highlights how key the school setting is for female rangatahi. One of the things that we did through the initial stages of the campaign was to do some qualitative research. So we did interviews with young women, with their whānau and their peers, and also with providers of physical activity to try to understand what was underpinning some of these stats and to understand what was driving those behaviors. And some of the 3 key things that we found through that research is that what's driving that motivation gap are 3 key things. One, it's the pressure into competition.
So the woman who gets it all in only.
Linda, would you mind? Oh, there you go. So 3 key things. One was a pressure into competition, and young women feeling that in those late teenage years, there were lots of stresses and things going in their life, and physical activity opportunities that were or are too structured and too competitive tend to add more stress and more pressure. So they tend to disengage from those activities. Then the fear of judgment, and young women feeling that in some of those environments or settings where physical activity occurs, they feel that many times they are judged for how they look, what they wear, how good or not or capable they are. So again, they tend to opt out. And then the lack of support, particularly for those young women that start disengaging from traditional organized offerings, they feel, especially the whānau or the people around them, don't really understand the value of other types of physical activity that might be not that organized or not that structured, or sometimes not as validated by society, like traditional sport or the AA netball team. So those were some 3 interesting factors that we found through the qualitative research, which help. And then what we do with the quantitative and the qualitative, we cross it over and we look at the attitudes and behaviors. And again, we can't put women into boxes, and we know this is a very non-homogeneous group, but we look at their engagement with physical activity based on the attitudes and behaviors. And we found in this age group, 14 to 17, there's 3 categories. Those young women that are very disengaged from physical activity, and it's most likely that had really negative experiences in younger ages. And so those young women will argue that physical activity can offer anything to them or can add any value in their lives. Then the majority, around the 62%, have an intent to increase physical activity. They understand the value that physical activity brings to their lives, but they struggle to motivate themselves, and they usually rely on others or peers to be active. And then there's a 30% of young women, this age group, that are what we're calling the highly engaged. So those are the ones that prioritize participation over other things in their lives, and they don't rely on extrinsic motivation to be active. So where this campaign is targeted, and again, we are not saying that we can put the young women in a box and target a campaign, but what we are trying to do with this campaign is to shift these morally engaged young women and to keep them engaged in physical activity rather than dropping to be less engaged or disengaged. And something coming back to what Karen was saying about the socio-ecological model, we use this framework at Sport New Zealand to identify how we can influence systems change or behavior change. And one of the things that we acknowledge with the campaign is that when it comes to the young women's physical activity and the relationship with it, there's lots of different things that have a role to play. It's not just the individual factors. So there's an individual component. Young women need to feel motivated. They need to feel confident. They need to have the skills and competency to be active. But then there's lots of other factors across personal relationships. So whānau, teachers, coaches, they all have a role to play, and they can all influence, for good or for bad, that physical activity experience. Then something that we also found through the research, and again, probably this is not new for you all, there's lots of social and cultural norms, particularly around the expectations on girls and women in society that have a role to play when it comes to young women and their relationship with physical activity. Even things like, and you probably see these daily in your schools, even things like uniforms. They're a social norm that is imposed in young women, and many times that limits or has an impact on how active or not they can be. Then physical environments, we also know things like, and again, this came really strongly through the Voice of Rangatahi, things like changing rooms, or even if it's open spaces where they don't feel safe or there's not enough lighting, it's really important. And then policy, and how policy is driving more engagement or supporting more engagement in physical activity. So we know that the campaign can fix everything, and it's not the only solution to address the drop-off in participation. But what we're really trying to impact through this campaign is mainly the 3 things. I'll flick into this one: the individual factors, the personal relationships, and the social and cultural norms. And hopefully, as I go through some of the assets of the campaign, you'll see how the different assets and the different interventions that we are taking are targeting or trying to help us achieve these different outcomes. So I'll quickly flip back. So the campaign was launched in February, 24th of February. So it's called ItsMyMove. And one of the really cool things that we also did through the design phase, we had an external working group. So we work with organizations like national sport organizations, NGOs that work with young women, RSTs, Secondary School Sport New Zealand, to have a better understanding of what's currently happening in this sector, what's working well, what's not, and how we could create this national movement. And we also, throughout the design of the campaign, we work with, we had lots of focus groups with young women to make sure that the assets and resources that we were producing were resonating with them, but also with adults. So the campaign, it's called, as I said, ItsMyMove. There's a microsite where, and we'll share all the links, a microsite where you can find more resources. And we also have some social media platforms, as you'll see, different channels are targeted to different audiences. Something that I think is really important, and again, goes back to the outcomes. We understand that the campaign doesn't live and doesn't work in isolation to lots of different other initiatives and interventions. So even from a Sport New Zealand perspective, there's lots of other work that we are doing, or the team is doing across the rangatahi space, that it's aiming and supporting to address some of these outcomes. So you might have heard about Balance is Better. So that's a really targeted initiative and investment that it's going particularly into national sport organizations for them to rethink the offerings to young people. We also have an active recreation plan. There's some work happening in the secondary school space, particularly in the sports space. So this campaign is almost like, from a gender perspective, is the glue that brings all those factors and other initiatives together. And we also acknowledge that there's some organizations that are doing some great mahi. For example, cricket, they are doing some really good work at a regional and national level with girl cricket, and how they are reframing and rethinking the offerings for kohine and young girls as well. And there's really good work that it's being done, and we also want to celebrate and champion that through the campaign. So I've done lots of talking, and I managed to cough only once, so that's an achievement. Hopefully some of you have seen the TVC, but if you haven't, that gives me a break from my talking, and I'll share the TVC for those that haven't seen it yet. Give me 1 second. I need just to change screens. Can you all see my new screen? Can I get a thumbs up? Yeah? No new screen? Yeah, because I didn't click share. Now you should see the new screen. Thank you, Shannon.
I know what you're gonna say. You're gonna ask me if we won. You're gonna tell me to get off my phone, do something worthwhile, that it's not a real sport, that I'm not really the right build. But I'm not doing this for you. I do this for the fun of it, for fitness, for the feel of it, for fun, for friendship. I'm doing this for me. Because it's my move.
Sorry, I didn't realize that if I muted myself, I was going to mute the clip as well. So hopefully you could see how some of those key themes that came through the insights and through the research were portrayed on that TVC. So that TVC is kind of like the champion asset for this campaign, and it really brings all those different aspects together. But the key audience that we were trying to reach with that TVC and those messages were mainly adults. And when we tested that in the focus group with adults, we had lots of parents and coaches that said, oh yes, I've seen that, I heard that, I've been that person before. And what we were trying to get across with that TVC is that many times unintentionally, adults, we say things or do things that instead of encouraging are disencouraging young women, because we are not really being on the shoes and understanding what else is going in the world and what their needs are, and how we need to rethink how we do play a role and how we can change our behaviors to be more supportive and more encouraging. So the campaign has, we talk about one campaign with two perspectives. So one perspective is really targeted to the adults, and we've been using lots of different mediums like PR and traditional media, because we know that's what usually adults consume, to reach the adults, and that can be parents, leaders of the sport and active recreation sector, parents, principals, facility providers, trying to reach them and share some of this data, share some of the insights, and really create that call for action, and help them understand how they can play a role differently. We had radio, we had the TVC going on open ear for a couple of months. Oops. And we also had billboards across major cities and also regional. We have a microsite, and as I said, I'm going to share all the links with you, and you can have a look and explore them further. But there's a microsite, and there's also a section within the Sport New Zealand website that has assets and resources for the girls, for parents, and for leaders, and all the research and all the video case studies are in here. So not so much in the microsite. The microsite is almost like a one-stop shop, mainly for girls and parents, but what I believe has some value and some merit, particularly for teachers, is the Sport New Zealand website, the campaign section. So under leaders, you'll be able to find some great articles that people from across the sector have written, and also some young women. And under the research, you'll be able to find this young women profile that we developed last year with all this quantitative and qualitative research. And there's also a series of 8 case studies that we created across the country to showcase organizations that are doing some great mahi with young women. And the idea of those case studies is that they inspire some conversations and inspire others to think differently and to see what amazing outcomes can be achieved with young women when we listen to them and when we give them a voice and work with them for them. So I was ahead of the game. So we had all these amazing case studies, lots of research. We also have a series of podcasts. So there's 5 podcasts that you can find on Spotify. If you just go look in Spotify, ItsMyMove, and we have interviewed some young women and also people like Irene Van Dyke and her daughter. And it's a really cool one, that one, to listen, because she talked through her own experience as a high performance athlete, but then how she had to change some of her mental models and behaviors when she became a mom, particularly a mom of a teenage girl that was really struggling with expectations when she started playing netball. So some really good assets there and tools that can be used for you as an adult, or by you as an adult or a parent, but also can be some really good discussion documents for you to unpack with your students. this is one of the things that Karen was referring to. One of the things that we did with the young women profile, we unpack all the insights and all the data, but turn them into tips or ideas that people can take away to rethink their practice. And so we know, for example, that peers are a key influencer for young women. So how can we, or how can providers of physical activity think and reframe their offerings, really leveraging from that power of the sisterhood? So how can the offerings be more around that social aspect and the connection and the opportunities to enjoy and be active with others, in shifting the focus towards that social connection rather than the performance or the or being too result driven. And then there's also a toolkit that has lots of promotional assets that any provider can download. And there's imagery, there's posters, there's logos, and lots of different social editable assets that can be downloaded. Again, if you're interested, you just flick us an email and we send you that. And then for the young women, we know young women don't watch much TV. We know young women don't read stuff or newspapers. So to reach young women, what we've done, we've mainly been using social media. So mainly through Instagram and TikTok. I have quiz question here. How many minutes do average New Zealanders spend on TikTok a day? Any guesses? I don't have a chocolate fish, but Karen will send one. No guesses? Okay, 83 minutes a day. It's the average time people spend on TikTok. And that's for people aged 18 years or older, because it's illegal to track the use of social media for young, for minors. So what we are not trying to get young women to spend even more time on TikTok, but what we are trying to see is how can we use these environments where they are to try to engage them into some kind of physical activity. So it's an experiment. We never done something like this, but what we are doing is we're capturing the learnings and capturing that engagement and see how that goes. So we have different types of we'll call it assets that we are using that really show some of those activities and takes them to a microsite where they can find physical activities to do for free. So all these different engagements take them to this movement hub. On this movement hub, we have created two collaborations, one with She Moves and one with Shut Up and Dance. So She Moves, they are a physical activity provider based in the Waikato, but all the offerings are online. So Gina, she is the blonde woman that you can see here. So she's a physical education teacher herself. She used to teach up in the Waikato. And since she had her two little young humans, she started this this business with Renee, and they are producing a series of bespoke workouts. So they have been brainstorming ideas and creating ideas with young women. And there's a whole variety of workouts that young women can access here totally for free. There's no need to have a login or a password, or there's no any hidden costs. Everything can be accessed for free through YouTube or through Instagram. And there's sessions like boxing, Pilates, high intensity training, a whole variety. And then Shut Up and Dance, they are an organization based in Wellington, and they are one of the things that they are trying is really challenge people's thinking about what dancing looks like and feels like, and it's all about fun and making dancing appealing and accessible to anyone. So the sessions, again, they are short and sharp, and usually they unpack a choreography and they teach that choreography throughout the session. And again, we are using with Shut Up and Dance, we are again exploring So we are doing live sessions on TikTok and Shut Up and Dance. Oh, sorry, TikTok and Instagram. That's my COVID brain starting to kick off. And one of the reasons why we decided to go with She Moves and Shut Up and Dance, not only because I had worked with young women before, but the reason why we decided to explore this digital environment was because through their research, lots of young women told us that they are looking online for physical activity opportunities to be active. But some of the things that sometimes they come across is that, first of all, there's a cost and they can't afford it or they don't want to sign up. And second, many times they come across trainers or instructors that don't portray a body image that they can relate to. So we wanted to make sure that the offerings that we were creating were really aligned to the key messages of the campaign, which are about physical activity being for everyone and not having to, to feel like you have to be or look a certain way to belong to those environments. So that's me, and I know there's lots of stuff there. One of the things I didn't say at the start, I am a physical education teacher by trade. I'm born and raised in Uruguay. I taught there for a few years before I moved to Spain. And one of the things that I never got to teach PE here in New Zealand, but I did some work when I was working at Sport Southland with primary schools. And one of the things that really impressed me from New Zealand was the richness of the physical education curriculum. Back home, the curriculum is way more structured, is very skill and competency driven. And I think in New Zealand, we have a really great opportunity with the physical education curriculum and those underlying concepts that Karen was talking about before, to really create an environment and create those healthy habits and healthy relationship with physical activity from really young ages. And we're also so lucky to have the amazing natural playground that we have in New Zealand. So I think there's a real opportunity here, but also a real challenge for you as physical education teachers to make a positive impact on young people's lives. And yeah, obviously, as I said before, the campaign is not the solution for all the challenges and issues that we are currently facing, but hopefully it gives you some ideas and some tools and some tips or some assets to take back to your classrooms, or even to rethink or challenge some of the teaching that you've been doing, or some of the behaviors you're seeing in your school that you might think are not the best for young women. Karen, I'll pass it back to you. I feel I've done way too much talking.
No, thank you, Luciana. You've done a fantastic job of sharing all that information, and there is a lot in there. There are a lot of takeaways for all of us, and we've unpacked this a fair bit to look at how it can be used in the classroom. And I do thank those people that put some questions when they registered as well to ask a little bit more about how to use it. And I think it's probably become fairly apparent some of the ideas just will fall out of what you've been watching. Obviously, really clearly there within those senior peer assessments, those opportunities for utilising the research that's been highlighted through the chats today. We know using the statistics, getting them to look at those things, we can get them to think critically about why have they come to be the physical activity participants that they are, what are the influences on them, and really get them to think critically about what they can do moving forward. And what we've just seen there around the accessibility of just even some of those digital spaces for them to go into, that I know our girls that I've taught in the past, during lockdown, they really made use of those online facilities and been able to get motivated through the workouts that way. So being able to have stuff that is free for them is a huge asset. So getting them to think about those things. And then if we move on to the next slide, critical thinking is a big part of what we want our students to be able to do. And, I just put it in there, when we think about our own PE classes, dodgeball, it's been a topic of discussion plenty of times in the past, but it's an easy debate to have. And so, getting them to think about the context that you have in your classrooms, what actual student voice are you collecting? Do you ask them what they want to be playing, what they want to be doing, what do they want to be involved in? And it is a really easy one to say something like a game of dodgeball, that everybody's enjoying it. Well, are they all enjoying it? And so asking yourself that question, but putting that question to them. When we think about those typical critical thinking questions, what interests are being served, whether it's dodgeball, whether it's another activity, who has the power. So those activities are really powerful. Don't forget to keep using them. And the new TKI site has got those critical thinking questions there that are easily accessible to remind you as well. So when again, I think it's that critical reflection for ourselves as educators. What are we doing? How are we choosing our context? So when it's highlighted that young women want to be able to move in ways that make them feel comfortable, they don't necessarily want to be competitive. They don't want to necessarily feel like other people are watching them or judging them. So what contexts are being chosen, and are they having opportunity to have some say in it? If they have some say in it, they're probably more likely to want to continue to participate. So when we think about how do we engage our students when they don't want to be engaged, are we asking them? So how are you collecting that feedback? When was the last time you did it? When did you last reflect on your program? And to what point can you co-design? How much input can you have from your students? How much can you actually hand over some of that leadership and let them take some responsibility for it? Is there an opportunity for them to create TikTok dances in your classes? Utilize what they really enjoy doing instead of expecting them to comply. I know a challenge that I struggled with a little bit initially was coming back from that very first lockdown, where some students just wanted to TikTok every chance they had in that moment of movement. And it was like, okay, how can we embrace that? So take it on board and think, what's actually going to help them move? Is it okay if they're TikToking while they're standing there in the space where they need to be moving a ball around while they're waiting? Does it matter? So aligning your content around your context, or are you aligning your context around your content? So really thinking about, what are you doing? What is your context? Your in, through, and about movement, and is it something that's engaging them? And then even thinking about who's setting your learning outcomes. What are you actually choosing to assess? And when we think about assessment for learning, those sort of activities where you can get them, again, being a part of the assessment and looking at self-assessments and peer assessments, but does it have to be around the practical? What other things can you be assessing? So what actually are your learning outcomes when you're really thinking about that in, through, and about? So I think, when we looked at some of the questions that we have there, that people were thinking about, how do you utilize this campaign? I'm really thinking there are some great opportunities to engage. One of the biggest things that you can do with your students, as we know, relationships with our students are really important. So having a chat with one-on-one when you have that opportunity, asking them how do they like to move, what would they like to learn, what would help them. That opportunity, She Moves, Show Up and Dance, can you draw them in and show them what's actually available? So help them find those resources as well. And, I would suggest those podcasts that are there, just as an adult, to go on and listen to them. There's some great ones there. They are really inspiring, very real, as Luciana said. I think very open and very honest, and just listening to that helps us. So I'm hoping that you can all get some ideas about how you can help our young rangatahi, wahine, feel empowered and have some control when you think about the context that you're using, what you're asking your students, and that at the very least will help to get some engagement there. I wondered if there were any questions at this point that anyone wanted to ask. I haven't seen any in the chat. Is there anyone who wanted to ask a question that you think might be useful? No? I might stop recording now.